Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well and welcome to another True Crime Tuesday. So today I've got a really interesting case, a serial killer case, which I haven't done one of these before. So yeah, this is the case of the Barbie and Ken Killers. Such an interesting case. And I just want to give a little warning now, this case does involve a sexual assault. So if that's going to trigger anyone or upset anyone, then please don't watch this video. I don't want to upset anyone. But yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment and subscribe. So yeah, let's get into it. So the Barbie and Ken Killers were Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardo, and they are a notorious serial killer couple in Canada. And they get their name because they're both very good looking, and from the outside everyone thought they had this perfect life. Paul Bernardo was born August 27th, 1964 in Scarborough, which is in Toronto, Canada. His parents were Kenneth and Marilyn, and he was the third child to them. So his family were pretty well off. On his dad's side of the family, there was a successful marble and tile business, but Kenneth, his dad, decided to not follow this. It wasn't for him, and instead he became a really successful accountant. Even though his dad's family were wealthy, his dad was not a nice person, and because of this, Paul ended up having quite a dysfunctional childhood. He wasn't that close to his dad at all. But his mother had a really happy childhood. She was adopted by a really happy family, adopted by some lawyers. Like I said, his dad was pretty abusive and his mother actually had an affair. And this was how Paul was conceived, so Kenneth wasn't even Paul's real dad. And Paul didn't even find this out until he was 16 years old. But Kenneth did get full custody of him, and Paul had Kenneth's last name. He had nothing to do with his real birth father. So when Paul was 11, his dad actually got arrested for fondling a little girl, which he wasn't a very nice guy. He was known for being a perv around the area. He was sexually assaulting his daughter, who was Paul's sister. So generally just really not a great guy. Marilyn was suffering from severe depression from her husband's actions. Like, she was known for being married to this pervert. He was in jail for, like, you know, doing naughty things. Marilyn was so bad, she just like stopped living pretty much. She just lived in the basement of the family home. But none of this affected Paul. He was known for being a really polite young boy, just a really good, well-mannered boy. He was doing very well in school. He had a really great childhood from the looks of it, even though he had all of these things coming at him to do with his family life. Throughout his time in school, he had quite a few girlfriends, and they all said he was just a lovely guy. He was very well mannered, very considerate and thoughtful. And he also had a few different jobs when he was at school. And one summer he was even a counsellor for like children at a summer camp, and the children loved him, like he was the favourite. But all this changed whenever Paul found out that he was the result of an affair. So he started being absolutely horrible to his mother, calling her all these awful names. He already hated his dad, but he hated him more now. And his personality completely did a flip. In 1982, he went to university. He had quite a few girlfriends, but none of them ever lasted more than a few months because he was very abusive towards them. He liked to humiliate them in public. He was just a very not nice guy. And at this point, he realised he had very dark sexual fantasies, and these scared a lot of girls away. So none of his relationships really lasted that long. He got a job as an accountant, and in May 1987 he committed his first sexual assault. So he raped a girl outside of her parents' house, and this was the start of him committing so many sexual assaults and rapes. Like, he was a notorious rapist, but he wasn't known. The media dubbed him as the Scarborough Rapist. And then a few months into his new hobby, because that's literally what he saw it as, he went to a pet convention, and this is where he met Carla Homolka. So now I am going to talk about Carla's childhood and kind of stay away from Paul for a minute. So it might be a bit confusing, but I thought this was the best way to like present the case and everything. So really sorry if this is confusing you. So now we're talking about Carla's childhood. So Carla was born the 4th of May 1970 in a place called Port Credit. But then her family moved to St Catharines, which was about an hour and a half away from Scarborough. Her parents were Carl and Dorothy, and her father was an immigrant who had moved to the US just for a better life, and her father was a travelling salesman. Carla was the eldest of 3 children. She had 2 sisters. She had Lauren and Tammy. And Carla, she was described as a lovely child. She loved animals, she loved drawing, especially drawing houses. Now, I read a report that said when Carla was in school, she saw some boys kind of poking a beetle with a stick, and she ran over and she said, no, it's wrong to kill, like we shouldn't kill. So she really did love animals, but that kind of contradicts what she did when she was about 7 years old. So she tied her friend's hamster to a pillow and threw it out the window. She just wanted to see like what would happen. She wanted the pillow to kind of be a parachute. Obviously didn't work, hamster died, right? But that isn't it. So when this hamster was buried, after a few weeks of it being buried, she went and dug it up to kind of look at the decomposing body, and after looking at it and kind of messing with it, she said gross. So kind of contradicts her loving animals, but I don't know, it's always kind of weird how these serial killers do stuff like this in their childhood, like kill animals and stuff. Carla was a very bright student. All her teachers loved her, though she could be a little bit bossy at times. And I read a report that when Carla was 10, she was at a park with some friends, and there was a boy and his sister there, and the sister kind of had a deformity, like her arms, she didn't have fully formed arms, they were like halfway. And Carla was laughing at them, and she told the brother, your sister's a freak, she belongs in a zoo with her seal arms, and made the brother and the sister cry. And she clearly was very satisfied by seeing them both cry and hurting. So even from a young age, she was very manipulative and just not a nice girl. And in the 3rd grade, she had an IQ test, and her result was 131. And I didn't really know if this was like good or bad, but 135 is kind of the top like percent, like the top 2% of the world. So she was pretty smart. She was a very girly girl. She loved like skirts and ribbons and the colour pink. It's all changed when she got to high school. She started wearing all black, wearing dark makeup, black nail polish. She was obsessed with like the occult and obsessed with just death and suicide. Just bit of a goth, to be honest. She enjoyed scaring people, and she would like try and summon like spirits and ghosts all the time. At this point, she also started having dark sexual fantasies, just like Paul. So when she was at high school in grade 12, she lost her virginity to her boyfriend at the time, who was called Doug, and she told everyone that it was like a really kinky thing. There were handcuffs involved, he was like choking her out, and Doug has said that none of this was true. It was just like vanilla, it was really plain, they just did the deed. But Doug did say that Carla, she did some weird things. So there was one time that he literally had to stop her from slitting her wrist with a knife, and honestly, I don't think she was right in the head, if I'm being completely honest, from what I was reading about her. And she also experimented with a lot of drugs, so she wasn't fully with it all the time. Carla was also known to be a bit of a daddy's girl, so if her mum ever said no to anything, she would go to her dad to get it. But her dad wasn't the greatest. He was having an affair, and he drank quite a lot, and he got very verbally abusive when he was drunk. And after Carla started dating Doug, he started calling Carla all these names, like a whore, a slut. And at this point, Carla started like kind of hitting back at her dad, calling him stuff as well. So after this, the relationship was kind of a little bit damaged. Carla also loved horror films. Her favourite film was Friday the 13th, and this has made like a massive impression on her. She just loved the idea of innocent virgins being slashed up. So that's interesting. And she also had a really varying personality at this time, like when she was a teenager. Sometimes she'd be really happy and talking and just like a bubbly person, but then other times she would barely speak for weeks, and her friends, they were really concerned about her. At one point, she showed them scars on her wrist from where she'd cut herself, and she tried to overdose on sleeping pills. And at the end of her senior year, Carla wrote in one of her friend's books, remember, suicide kicks and fasting is awesome. Bones rule, death rules, death kicks, I love death. Kill the fucking world. So, that's lovely. She got a job at #1 Pet Centre, and when she was 17, her and her friend decided to go to a pet convention in Scarborough. And this is where the stories correlate, and this is where she met Paul. So she was 17 and Paul was 23. And they were in a restaurant, and they were actually like renting one of the rooms above the restaurant. That's where they were staying. And her and her friend were just having a meal, and Paul and his friend came and kind of sat down with them. And from the get-go, they were being very flirty. They kind of had an instant click. And it didn't take long for Carla to take Paul back up to her room, and they engaged in sexual intercourse. And this is where they discovered they both had really dark sexual fantasies, and this kind of furthered their relationship because it meant they could do stuff. They did a role play thing where he was the king and she was his slave, and he was very abusive towards her, but she kind of encouraged it. And she had a really weird relationship with him, just a very weird relationship. He asked her if he could be a rapist, and she said yeah, that'd be really cool. So she definitely encouraged his bad behaviour and he encouraged hers. It was just a very toxic relationship. After knowing each other for 2 months, they got engaged. And Paul was obviously still raping girls. Carla knew, and Carla was like fine with it. She didn't really care. But obviously the police didn't know. And in late 1987, a girl came forward talking about her sexual assault, which was done by Paul. And she managed to give a really good description of her attacker. And this made a police sketch which looked literally identical to Paul. And the police didn't release this until 1990, but when they did, everyone who knew Paul said it looked like him, and some people even went to the police and said this. The police questioned him but didn't really think of him as a suspect because he was so charming. He kind of charmed his way out of it. But they did take some DNA samples, but because it was the 90s, it took ages for them to get back. So it was literally years before these were kind of got back. And at this same time, Paul and Carla moved to St Catherine's, and they moved in with Carla's family for a bit. They were saving up for their own place, but obviously it was a lot cheaper to move in with them, save some extra money, and then move into their own place. And Carla's family loved Paul so much, and especially Carla's little sister, Tammy. She thought of Paul as like this big brother figure, and Paul had a really weird fascination with Tammy. She was 15, and he was kind of infatuated with her. He was a little bit obsessed with her. And obviously she was a virgin. And when Carla and Paul met, Carla was not a virgin. And this was kind of one of her biggest regrets. That she says that she couldn't give him her virginity. It was something she could never give him. So what she used to do was open up Tammy's blind so Paul could watch from the outside and watch her get changed. But in the end, she offered Paul Tammy's virginity, which he accepted. So obviously she was working at the vet, so she stole some supplies. So she stole stuff that they used to sedate the animals so they could put it into something like Tammy was eating or drinking, so she wouldn't remember the attack. They made Tammy spaghetti bolognese and laced it, but sadly for them, Tammy woke up before they could do anything. So they had to wait, and they tried again. So they were having like a lovely family get together. It was the 23rd of December, and Paul was filming a lot of it on this like videotape that he had with him. And then Carla and Paul convinced Tammy to stay up and watch a film with them. And they were drinking alcohol, and they laced her drink, and she passed out. And yeah, Paul raped her. She had a cloth with like another drug on which she held over Tammy's mouth, and it was actually filmed on the same video recorder that they filmed the family Christmas on. And Carla actually joined in as well on her own sister's rape. So the drugs they were using, they did not proportion them right at all. So when Tammy woke up, she started coughing and literally choking on her own vomit. And the couple obviously freaked out. They got her dressed and they called 911. They took her to the hospital. They didn't say anything about all the chemical burns all over her face. And Tammy actually died from obviously not being able to breathe because she was choking. And obviously the family were heartbroken. Just said that like she drank too much, and they said that the burns on her face were from them trying to do CPR on them and the police and everything. Like, they believe them. So the death was ruled as an accident, and the couple got on with their lives. They moved out into their own place, and that was just like a town away from St Catherine's, and they just had no regrets at all. And Carla was texting her friends, and some of the text was just horrible. She was saying that her dad should get over it, he's still grieving. This was a month later, and just saying her dad was like weak and all of this, and just saying horrible stuff about her dad for being sad about their daughter dying. And Carla's dad actually said they should postpone the wedding because obviously it wasn't really time for festivities like this, and he was actually paying for a lot of the wedding, and he said they should just like do it in a courthouse, like a little simple thing. And Carla was not happy. She wanted like a big grand wedding. And at this time they were having sex a lot and recording it, And they would do role play as well, where Carla would wear Tammy's clothes, and then she would kind of act like Tammy and act like a damsel in distress, and this really turned Paul on, I guess. And they were just living a happy life. They were living life. Paul did lose his job, but then he got another one working for like this illegal cigarette company, like smuggling cigarettes in. So he was just living life, and he was still committing all these rapes. And no one had kind of connected the dots that the rapes in Scarborough had stopped and started in St Catherine's. And the dots kind of hadn't been joined together at this point by police. And then Carla actually found their next victim. So I'm not sure who this girl was, she's just referred to as Jane Doe. But she worked with Carla at the vets. So Carla invited her home with her. She laced her drink, and when she passed out, she went over to Paul and said, "I've got a wedding gift for you." And then they sexually assaulted her, and they filmed the entire thing as well. And this girl woke up with no knowledge of what happened and just left with no knowledge of anything. And then less than a week later, on June 15th, Paul was driving around and he found his next victim. And this was Leslie Mahaffey. She was actually out because it was her friend's wake the night before. And obviously it was like 2 a.m, the early hours of the morning. She walked home with her friends and she found the front door was locked because she'd missed her curfew. So she said to her friends, just go, like, the side door will be open, but it wasn't. So she went to a little phone box just down the road and she rang her friend to be like, "Can I stay at yours? I'm locked out." But the friend's mum said no. So she said, "It's alright, I'll just go back home and wake my mum up." But she never got there because Paul found her first. So Paul went over to her and offered her a cigar, and before she could even answer, he wrapped his jumper around her face as a blindfold and kind of just threw her in the car. And she was there at the house for 24 hours being like sexually assaulted, tortured. It was just horrible. Paul always says that with all their victims they didn't want to kill them, and it was Carla who wanted to kill them, but then Carla says the opposite. So they filmed all of the assaults on her but not the murder. And Paul said that Carla killed her with drugs, but then Carla said that Paul killed her by strangling her, so it's kind of unknown. So they killed her upstairs but then moved her to the basement. And it was actually Father's Day, and literally they just jumped in the shower, and then Carla's family came around for a lovely Father's Day dinner when there was a dead body in the basement. Just baffles me how they can act so normal. Really don't understand. So when the family left, they got like a hacksaw and just sawed up her body. They encased it in cement and then dumped this cement in a local lake. 2 weeks later they got married, and this was the 29th of June 1991, and it was like a lavish event that even had like a horse-drawn carriage. And it was on this day that Leslie's body was found by some fishers. And then in August, so a few months later, Carla invited the same girl from her work round again, and they did the same thing, but this time she stopped breathing. Like the same thing happened that happened with Tammy, where she started choking on her own vomit. But they managed to resuscitate her, and they just said to her like, "You stopped breathing, but we fixed you." And she was like, "Alright, cool," and then she left. So the next year, the 16th of April, they were parked in a church car park just waiting to find the next victim. And this is where they found 15-year-old Kristen French walking home from school. And Carla called out to her, basically saying like, "Do you have directions?" And she had a map and everything. But then when Paul came up behind Christian and blindfolded her and threw her in the car, but it was the middle of the day and lots of people saw what happened. She was there for 3 days being like tortured, sexually assaulted, and Christian was a smart girl and she just kind of went along with it, thinking maybe they'll let her go. But after 3 days they killed her again. It wasn't filmed, so we're not sure kind of who killed her and what happened there. After this they had a shower, got changed and went out for a family meal. It was an Easter meal with Carla's family, and again they acted normal. Really don't understand it. When they got home they like cut all of Christian's hair off, they cut her body up, did the same thing they did with the other body, and they dumped it in the same lake about a kilometre away from where Leslie's body was. And at this point Paul's abuse towards Carla was a lot worse as well. Like it was daily beatings. There was one point where she had 2 massive black eyes, but she refused to leave him because, you know, she said she loved him. And then January 1993, her family finally convinced her to leave him and stay at their house. And this is where the police involved, and they took her to the hospital as kind of, you know, for her injuries. And they questioned her, and at this point they were kind of connecting some dots. So they were questioning her about the domestic abuse, but the 2 investigators from the case, Kristen's case and Leslie's case, they were in the same room, and Carla kind of knew who these men were. Everyone in the town knew who these men were, So she kind of freaked out and realised they were onto her. And it was also at this time the DNA results from literally years ago. This is how long things took with the DNA in the 90s. They came in and revealed that Paul was a Scarborough rapist. And obviously Carla was kind of freaking out at this point, so she went and told her uncle pretty much everything about what happened. And I presume that she left some bits out, but obviously he was very shocked. He was appalled. And then she got a lawyer and she told him everything once again. She confessed to the 3 murders, but she said, you know, she was a victim of Paul's, like, she was being abused, she was manipulated into doing it, like, he basically made her do it. And she said that normally she wouldn't have done any of these things, but he made her. And her lawyer got her a really good plea deal, so if she pled guilty and she kind of testified against Paul, she would get 2 years for the involvement in her sister's death, she would get 10 years for Leslie's murder and 10 years for Christian's murder. But she could serve the 2 10-year sentences at the same time, so she was pretty much serving 12 years. And she also had the possibility of parole after 3 years. And obviously Paul was arrested and a warrant was like got, and they searched the home for kind of everything, and they found like a notebook that Paul had with like detailed descriptions of all the sexual assaults and everything. But they didn't find all the tapes until right before Paul's trial, and this was such bad timing. Because obviously they had the tapes, so they didn't need Carla's confession and they didn't need Carla to be testifying against Paul. So this meant that Carla pretty much got away with these crimes for pretty much no reason, because they couldn't go back on the deal at this point. And it also showed Carla had so much more involvement than what she said. So she pretty much manipulated the police, and this is known as the deal with the devil, because it's literally the worst deal ever made. So Paul got a life sentence with a minimum of 20 years. But he was kind of determined to be still dangerous to society, and they basically said that they'd never let him out of jail. And when he was up for parole, they found him with a dangerous weapon, so this kind of furthered their reasonings for not letting him go. And he has lots of fangirls as well, and one even said they were going to get married to him, and he agreed to this whenever he got out for parole. Obviously this didn't happen, and this baffles me, but Carla obviously got out after 12 years. She's out living a normal life, got a normal job, got 3 kids, she's married and happy. I want to know what the parents say, because obviously she murdered her sister. Like, I know it wasn't on purpose, but the horrible things that she did, and I was trying to find like statements from the family, but there wasn't any out there. Obviously they just want privacy. But yeah, this is the end of this case, the Barbie and Ken Killers. Very interesting. I honestly think that they both had issues, especially Carla. But yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.